welcome to Chess Talk. Today we're going to be understanding piece movements, which means we're going to be learning the unique movement patterns of each chess piece. The king, queen, rooks, bishops, knights, and pawns, empowering you to strategize and execute tactical moves. So let's dive straight into the video. So as you can see, here is the chessboard with only pawns. Let's first look at the pawn movement. Let's take this pawn. The initial move of the pawn only has an option of two spaces up or one space up. And remember, only the initial move has an option of two spaces up. So say I move two spaces up for this pawn. Now it can only move one space up and so on. So say I move one space up. Do you think the pawn can move two spaces up? Yep, that's right, it can't. So it can only move one space up. So it can only move like this further on. So now that's all you have to know about the pawn movement. And we still have one more thing left for the pawn movement. Let's say we have a black pawn and our pawn is positioned right here. We can capture this black pawn like diagonally. The pawns can capture other pawns and pieces diagonally, like that. So let's say we are here and the black pawn is here now, for instance. Do you think we'll be able to capture the black pawn? Yep, that's right, we can't. Because the pawn can only capture diagonally and it cannot capture vertically. So, say not just a pawn, we'll keep say a black knight. The pawn can still capture the black knight diagonal. As long as it's diagonal, a pawn can capture any piece as long as it's diagonal. For the next time, as long as it's diagonal. A pawn cannot capture a piece which is vertically opposite to it. The pawn cannot capture this pawn, or that pawn cannot capture this pawn. So yeah, that's the pawn movements done. Now let's look at the bishop movements. The bishop is known to move diagonally. Let's say this bishop is placed right here and the bishop can only move to these squares here. The bishop can only move to these squares. So this clearly says that the bishop can only move diagonally. And a bishop cannot capture a bishop which is in another color. Say this bishop is, the black bishop is positioned here, the bishop cannot capture this. It because it only moves diagonally. Now let's say this bishop is positioned here now. The bishop can capture this because it is diagonal to the bishop. So I can capture it. It's pretty easy. The bishop movement is, I would say, the simplest one along with the rook. The rook will be looking at after the knight. So the bishop can only move diagonally and cannot leave its starting position color. Like say it starts at black here. In this position, let's take this bishop and it can only stay on the black squares. No matter what, the bishop can only stay on the black squares. It cannot move to the white square. So say this bishop is positioned at the white square while starting. This bishop can only be on a white square for the entire game. No matter what, it cannot be on a black square. So that's all you have to know about the bishop movements. Let's move on to the knight movements. The knight is a very unique piece in chess. This piece can jump over other pieces because it's basically a horse and the piece can jump over other pieces. So, for instance, the knight can move uh, like here, not like that, my bad, like here, 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 like there, there. These are the possible squares that the knight can move to. Which are these squares? The knight can only move like an L position, like an L shape. The knight can move like an L, like that. So here, the knight cannot move straight, diagonally, or horizontally. It can only move in this L shape. No matter where it's positioned on the board, it can only move in an L shape. So say, let's do this simpler. So 1, 2, 3. It can move here. The same pattern. 1, 2, 3. So now let's take this square. How do we come here? 1, 2, 3. This is how the knight moves. To any direction, it has to go in the 1, 2 turn pattern. So anywhere it goes, 1, 2, and turn. This is how the knight has to move. So say there is a pawn blocking the knight, and there's a pawn here. I mean, let's take a bishop, which is here. The knight can jump over the pawn and capture the bishop. Because it's basically a horse, it can jump over the pawn and capture the bishop. No other piece can do that. The knight is a horse, so that's why it can jump over another piece. So say this pawn is black. Can it jump over it to capture the knight right here? Can it? Of course it can. Because the knight is known to jump over another piece no matter what. So yeah, that's all you have to know about the knight movement. And now let's move on to the rook movement. Let's position the rook here. The rook can only move in a straight angle. Can only move like this. The rook can only move straight. Once more, the rook can only move straight. And the rook cannot jump over any pieces. So the rook is basically the most simple piece to move in chess, because even if you try making a mistake in the rook's movement, it's pretty hard to. So the rook here can move to this square, this square, this square, this square, this square, this square, and this square, and all these squares up here. The rook cannot move diagonally, so the rook can only move in a straight line. So yeah, the rook, say we want to capture this pawn here. The rook, will it be able to capture it? Yes, you're right. The rook can capture this pawn effortlessly. So the rook can capture any piece as long as it's on a straight angle to it. So yeah, the rook movement is done. Now let's move on to the queen movements. The queen, also known as the most powerful piece after the king. So let's take this queen. The queen has plenty of squares we can move to. The queen combines the bishop and the rook. Forget about the knight because the knight can jump over pieces and moves in an L position, in an L movement. The queen cannot move in an L movement but can move diagonally and vertically. and horizontally, of course. So the queen can move anywhere in the board as long as it's diagonal, vertical, and horizontal. Just like this. Just like that, the queen can move anywhere to the board as long as the movement is in diagonal direction, vertical direction, horizontal direction. So yeah, the queen movement is done. Now comes the king. The king of kings is here. So the king is a pretty much a weakling, but controls the entire game. The entire game is based on these two kings. So let's look at the white king for an example. The white king can move one step to any direction, just like that. One step to any direction. And which I mean by not like this or like that. The king can move diagonally, straight, horizontal, sideways. But as long as it's one step. The king controls the entire game of chess, but is such a weakling, and the entire kingdom has to protect the king. So, yeah, that's the movement of pieces of the king, obviously. And say there's a knight right here. Will the king be able to capture the knight? And that's right, it can. As long as it's one step to any direction, any piece is there, the king has got him. Any piece. So say the pawn is here, the king can get it. So yeah, that is all for today's video. Hope you enjoyed learning about chess and make sure to stay tuned for more chess learning. Toodaloo!